Hollywood sells you glitz, but beneath that polished shine, there are shadows most people never even imagine. Think about it. Behind the cameras and premieres, some of the wealthiest entertainers built an entirely separate world under the ground. Not just a safe room or a panic bunker, but whole tunnels running beneath Los Angeles mansions like veins under skin. And these weren't urban legends whispered by conspiracy junkies. They came into focus when federal agents raided Diddy's sprawling estate, tore through the place with dogs and crowbars, and supposedly stumbled on something that shouldn't have existed in a residential property. Reports called them catacombs, massive passageways linking guest houses, side estates, and even connecting to neighboring celebrity homes. You read that and your first thought might be, why in the world would anyone need that kind of escape hat? That's the exact question investigators ran into. At first, people framed it as eccentric billionaire stuff, like the kind of indulgent project a mogul commissions after too much champagne and too little accountability. But then the story started to shift. Whispers said the tunnels weren't unique to one mansion. They were a shared infrastructure, a network quietly stitched into the hillsides for decades. And once that theory surfaced, everything else clicked into place. Why certain stories about high-profile arrests went nowhere, why evidence in notorious cases seemed to vanish, why scandals sometimes fizzled out before they had a chance to explode. If there was a way to disappear people, documents, or even entire parties from the spotlight in seconds, suddenly half of Hollywood's mysteries had a common denominator. The scariest part wasn't the engineering marvel itself. It was how quickly information about those tunnels got scrubbed. Local news stations aired early segments on the raids, but any mention of underground passageways was gone within days. No photos, no footage, nothing. Comment sections online filled with questions then dried up. Even gossip bloggers, the ones who never miss a chance to stir controversy, went silent, like someone had pressed a mute button across the city. That kind of coordinated blackout doesn't happen without serious muscle. It left the impression that these tunnels weren't just embarrassing, they were radioactive. Something bigger than a celebrity meltdown was at stake. And then came the name that reignited everything, Tupac Shakur. The man whose supposed death in 1996 became the foundation of more conspiracy theories than almost any figure in music history. According to a swirl of insiders, former security contractors, bodyguards tied to the Panthers, even people claiming to have seen hospital switches, Shakur never actually died in that Las Vegas chaos. He was critically wounded, yes, but that night became the staging ground for a carefully executed extraction. The plan, these sources say, didn't end in a hospital or a Caribbean island. It began right under Los Angeles, inside those tunnels. The idea sounds crazy until you start stacking the details. The coroner's report listing his body weight wrong, the cremator who abruptly retired, Suge Knight's years of cryptic comments that nobody's been arrested because, in his words, Pac's not gone. And then there's the Cuba connection. Michael Nice, a bodyguard once affiliated with the Panthers, claimed Shakur was flown to the Caribbean with forged papers and a covert security detail. The first place he was stashed before leaving the country? Those same tunnels. So now the question shifts from did he have escape routes to was he part of a system built to make legends vanish when it served the industry? Imagine the optics if true. The biggest rap icon of a generation hidden beneath the city that both created and destroyed him, with contractors, moguls, and law enforcement all complicit in making sure he disappeared without a trace. Suddenly, the tunnels aren't quirky architecture, they're the backbone of an underground syndicate, the Catacomb Society, as some whisper, a hidden alliance where blackmail tapes, trafficking deals, and cover-ups all passed below ground, while the world above saw nothing but limousines and red carpets. And with Diddy now drowning in federal charges, those buried rumors are clawing back into daylight. The strange thing about Los Angeles is how it thrives on secrecy while selling the illusion of openness. Paparazzi chase stars down freeways, gossip outlets dissect relationships, but the real stories happen behind doors and apparently beneath floors. Former officials from LA County quietly hinted that these tunnels weren't about luxury at all. They described them as functional arteries for the entertainment elite, places where messes could be swept out of sight without ever touching the surface. If a party spiraled out of control, guests could be ushered away before anyone outside noticed. If incriminating evidence threatened to ruin careers, it could be carried below ground and locked in vaults no journalist would ever reach. What looks like excess starts to feel like infrastructure designed for damage control. Blueprint leaks added weight to the rumors. Hidden permits for below-grade egress structures showed up in property filings. Architects refused interviews. Engineers who once bragged about projects suddenly clammed up. It was as if the city itself had signed a silent contract never to acknowledge the existence of the catacombs. That silence became deafening when court documents from recent raids mentioned seizures of hard drives and tapes. Not weapons, not drugs, tapes. Prosecutors didn't care about Diddy's luxury cars or jewelry. They wanted whatever was stored in those underground vaults. One investigator told a journalist off record, "The guns are for show. The tapes are the real arsenal." The Shakur angle gave the whole story a sharper edge. Conspiracy boards lit up with claims that the tunnels weren't only for hiding scandals, but for staging disappearances. According to one former death row associate, the chaos in Las Vegas provided perfect cover. While the world focused on flashing lights and panicked crowds, a switch was allegedly made. A body double became the public face of tragedy, while the real Shakur was moved along a different path, one that ended beneath a mansion in Los Angeles. Whether you believe it or not, the consistency of these accounts is unsettling. Different insiders, years apart, describing the same underground safe houses, the same quiet security details, the same Caribbean flights. What makes the theory harder to dismiss is how little closure the official story ever provided. No one was convicted for the shooting at the time. Key witnesses vanished. Files were sealed. Even decades later, Shakur's family remained doubtful. His brother Mop Shakur openly told interviewers he never trusted the official version. Suge Knight, who was in the car, continues to drop comments that sound less like grief and more like riddles. These aren't random internet trolls. They're people who stood closest to the chaos, and they've never let the doubts rest. Meanwhile, Diddy's legal battles keep dragging the tunnels back into the spotlight. Federal indictments mention trafficking, racketeering, even blackmail. Prosecutors openly suggested that victims and witnesses disappeared from the system through coordinated intimidation. One woman, subpoenaed for testimony, simply vanished, her own attorney unable to explain her absence. Another abruptly remembered a non-disclosure agreement and refused to speak further. Judges expressed frustration as trial dates slipped. Behind each delay, whispers of the tunnels resurfaced. If there truly is a network designed to make inconvenient people disappear, these cases might be the first time it's tested in a courtroom. Among investigators, a darker rumor circulates. The so-called Catacomb Society, allegedly a circle of power players, moguls, producers, politicians who use the tunnels not just for parties or escapes, but as meeting halls where careers were decided and threats were delivered. Never gone on record admitting to attending, but multiple filings reference anonymous testimony about underground gatherings. If even half of it is true, the tunnels represent more than scandal. They're an alternate government of Hollywood, pulling strings in the dark while the city above pretends everything runs on talent and luck. Courtrooms are supposed to be theaters of truth, but in this case, they feel more like stages for shadows. Federal prosecutors arrived with boxes of evidence, yet the focus of their questions always seemed to bend back toward the same mystery. What exactly was buried beneath those Los Angeles mansions? Witnesses stumbled through testimony, sometimes backing out mid-sentence, other times retreating into vague answers. Attorneys whispered about tapes that couldn't be shown, about contracts that vanished from archives, about people who had once agreed to testify but never made it past the deeper investigators investigators pushed, the more the silence itself became incriminating. It was as though the tunnels weren't just structures, they were pressure points holding up an entire industry. Security staff who once worked mansion events painted eerie pictures. One described unmarked vans arriving at night, unloading guests who never entered through the front gates. Another said certain corridors were reserved only for those with clearance from unnamed executives. A third claimed he was ordered to sweep security cameras whenever VIPs disappeared into the underground. None of them could prove what happened behind those reinforced doors, but the consistency of their accounts formed a chilling mosaic. Whatever occurred down there was never meant for daylight. Technology added another twist. Engineers who studied confiscated hard drives hinted at encrypted archives filled with video files dating back decades. Metadata suggested multiple cameras had been installed in subterranean rooms, running continuously. That discovery made the blackmail theory impossible to ignore. If celebrities were filmed without their knowledge, then those vaults were more than hiding places, they were bargaining chips. Suddenly, Diddy's empire looked less like a music label and more like an insurance policy. Keep the tapes hidden, keep the leverage intact, and no one dares to challenge you. But leverage cuts both ways. As whispers about the tapes spread, high-profile figures began distancing themselves. Producers who once praised Diddy's genius grew quiet. Politicians stopped returning calls. Even fellow moguls acted as though his downfall was inevitable. For years, rumors suggested he kept files that could sink half the industry. Now insiders wondered if federal agents had those very files in their possession. The fear wasn't just about one man going down, it was about how many others might get pulled under with him. Into that swirl of paranoia came the old ghost, Tupac Shakur. New filings mentioned testimony from unnamed sources linking the catacombs to his disappearance. Forums erupted again, dissecting every inconsistency in the 1996 reports. The coroner's errors, the cremator's abrupt retirement, the lack of definitive closure. Suddenly, they weren't loose threads, but possible evidence of orchestration. If the tunnels provided a staging ground, then Shakur's survival wasn't just a fantasy, it was a logistical possibility. Some insiders even alleged that Diddy himself bankrolled the operation, not out of loyalty, but out of fear that Suge Knight would retaliate unless Shakur was removed from the board entirely. The idea of Shakur alive in Cuba or elsewhere still divides believers and skeptics. Yet, what matters most is how these tunnels transform the conversation. They shift the story from conspiracy theory to structural cover-up. If a network existed that could move people, files, and secrets beneath Los Angeles, then anything becomes plausible. Disappearances aren't mysteries, they're logistics. Careers ending overnight aren't accidents, they're decisions made in hidden rooms. In that light, Shakur's story feels less like an anomaly and more like a template. As the trial grinds forward, one question hangs heavier than any verdict: how much truth will ever surface? Prosecutors want convictions, the public wants closure, but the forces guarding those tunnels seem determined to keep the most damning secrets locked away. The Catacomb Society, whether real or myth, has already done its job by making silence more powerful than testimony, and so the city waits, buzzing above ground with premieres and award shows, while beneath the hills, a different kind of history hums quietly in the dark.